Hello, everybody, and we are excited to be here for another episode of the Wealth Preservation Podcast. I am Josh Saunders, your co-host, along with my other co-host, Mark Seither. Mark, how you doing today, man?
Good. Super excited for today's episode. Last episode, we came to you from across the nation, and today we're coming to you from across the globe. So Wealth Preservation Podcast is growing, baby. This is awesome.
That's right. In the quote of Step Brothers, worldwide.
Prestige worldwide.
Prestige worldwide. We're everywhere. Now, Mark, as you know, we're really excited about our guest today. We have Andrew Henderson. He is the Nomad Capitalist, and we are very excited to bring this to you guys. It's a very interesting topic, and there's going to be lots of good tidbits coming out for those of you that either are thinking about going overseas or want to live overseas or invest overseas. And we're excited to hear his story, how he got to where he's at today. And then, in episode 2, like we always do, we're going to kind of go into his tidbits and how his process is and how it works and how he gets people to move overseas or move their assets overseas and invest. And we're really excited about all of this. So for all of our entrepreneurs out there, great stuff. And we hope you enjoy these episodes. So let's kind of go ahead and kick this off.
Yeah. So Andrew, our listeners are, we have a strong entrepreneur listener, audience. One thing that we find in common with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, is they had an upbringing where even from the very get-go, they just kind of knew, I think about things differently. I approach problems differently. I am sure that is no different from you and your experience. So let's start at the beginning. Was third grade Andrew Henderson I'm going to go conquer, I'm going to travel the globe and move assets overseas, or give us the initial background of the Nomad Capitalist origins.
Well, I appreciate you having me. When I was young, I was always very fascinated by what happened around the world. I remember having 2 big maps that would hang up in this big bedroom in this old house where they made the bedrooms really big. And on one wall, I had a big world map, and on one wall, I had a big U.S. map. And the U.S. map was really not so interesting to me. I was always looking at the world map and planning travels and planning where I would go. Didn't really understand what it was like to be in business until about 12. So that's still a pretty young age, I guess, to be involved in business. And I realized I wanted to be, at that time, it was Bill Gates. And so it's interesting to see some of the people that I followed and kind of idolized as a kid now coming back into the public debate in interesting ways. But I was very interested in tech. I was very interested in him. And I think what I liked was that he was kind of a conqueror. And it was very interesting to me to take over. And so as I got more interested in business, I started looking at, how do I put the 2 things together? I started looking at, could I do business in London, or could I do business in other places in the world? And I won't say that as a kid I figured it all out, but as a kid I did get a great permission slip from my father that I think speaks to what you're talking about, which is you don't have to stay here in the city, the state, the country to support your family, and you should go where you're treated best. Those became 5 very prescient words: go where you're treated best. And it's the words that we live by here at Nomad Capitalist, which was everyone else is sticking around out of sense of obligation. We're going to take care of ourselves. You should focus on yourself. And by doing that, you can have the greatest impact for yourself, your family, the world. And I think that was a great starting point at a young age, at 12, 13 years old. To realize that you don't have to do things the way most of the people do it. You can make decisions that are different and that are out of the system.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive into that. I don't want to turn this a psychology session, but kind of, how did your parents or your dad kind of shape that? I mean, was he a traveler, or was he just,
was he trying to get you out of where you're at?
Was he trying to get you out of Cleveland because you made him mad?
Well, I think my father realized there are ebbs and flows to society and to cultures and to nations. And
sure.
We did some traveling for sure. He was, pretty successful in a smaller business. And so that afforded us some nice trips. He always took me on the industry trips. I remember, 14 years old going and walking around Manhattan for the first time on my own because I went on an industry trip with him there. And so I got to see some interesting places and be around some interesting people growing up. He does not, he was not going to the jungles of Borneo or to the Amazon or whatever the case may be. But he did study, and he said back in the mid-90s, he said, Australia, New Zealand, Chile and Argentina are countries that probably have a lot more promise than the United States. I think he was right on 3 out of 4 of those. Certainly Australia perhaps is kind of turning the way of the United States now, but they've been very prescient suggestions to go and explore. And he just said, the U.S. is not going to be the best place for entrepreneurs. And he kind of saw what you're seeing right now 25 years ago, which was you're going to see people who are successful reviled. You're going to see it be evil to make money, to have a business. And I think he saw those early signs. And I even remember one time I came down, I was in this kind of advanced program in school in 5th or 6th grade. And they wrote an article about us in the big city newspaper saying how we were a bunch of, whatever they called us, who were, nasal gaving and building macaroni sculptures all day. I said, this is kind of hurts. He said, get used to it. This is what happens when you achieve anything in life. And I think he realized what the direction that the U.S. would go and the West would go. And I think we've seen that play out today.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. There is very much so like, if I had what he had, I would have done the same exact thing. And it's, for the most part, it's not true, right? I mean, you've probably witnessed that where it's like you've probably seen a lot of people where they were blessed and they didn't do near as much as they could have. And people who didn't have as much that, through hard work, we're able to accomplish a lot more than, people who are more fortunate.
Well, yeah. And I also think that he looked at it from the perspective of this was the best place for me, right? Sure. I'm hopefully having our first conference in a number of 5 years coming up. And one of the people that we just put on our list of speakers, we've got Robert Kiyosaki, we've got the former president of Georgia, we've got some others. But I said, just for fun, let's call, what does it take to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to come? And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, Arnold Schwarzenegger's pitch to your people is how he went where he was treated best back when he did it. Right. That was the place to go when you were coming from where he was from and when he moved. Now it's different. And so I think, my upbringing kind of focused on the fact that you wouldn't leave the United States. You wouldn't even consider it in 1953.
Correct.
I mean, even when I was born, 1984, the best place in the world to be born, followed by, I believe, West Germany. Okay. So that kind of tells you how the world has changed. It's not the case anymore. The United States is not in the top 20. I think that's what we kind of looked forward to. And I think that it kind of, just kind of gelled with our family's approach to life as well, which was kind of what you mentioned. Not everyone who has an opportunity makes the most of it. I remember, going to my father's office as a kid, and I'd be like, how come you have the big office and this guy's the small office with no window? It's like, well, that guy's much more talented, but he's got a bad attitude, quite frankly, and nobody likes it. And that's why even though he's much better than I am, quite frankly, his natural talent doesn't get ahead. And I think that it really taught me a lot. I think you can probably apply the same thing to countries. Countries have natural talents, and sometimes they squander them. Sometimes they chase their best people away. And I think you're seeing that right now in the West.
I'm gonna also call Venezuela a little bit on that one with all the natural resources and amazing people. I can't tell you when I've traveled how many people from Venezuela, especially doctors and lawyers I've met.
People.
They all fled a long time ago. That brain drain from Venezuela happened, probably a decade ago, or maybe more. Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's jump from, so you have that experience, a young kid, 12, 14, you get into college, and I mean, what kind of happened in college?
Maybe.
What was that?
Barely, maybe.
Barely, maybe. Well, first of all, where'd you go to college? Or where'd you start going to college?
So when I was in high school, I just wanted to be in business. And I went back because I'm a citizen of St. Lucia as one of my second citizenships. And to become a citizen of St. Lucia and all these Caribbean countries, you have to submit every document from your entire life. And so I had my elementary school transcript, my middle school transcript, my high school transcript. I was looking at them a couple of weeks ago. I didn't actually do as bad as I thought. It was actually not so terrible. But I thought in high school I'm doing terrible because all my friends went on to become doctors and really smart people. And I was just kind of bumming around. And so my parents said, you know what, we're sick of waiting around. We're at least going to leave the cold, frigid weather and high taxes in the U.S. side of Ohio, of Cleveland, and we're going to move to Arizona. I'm like, all right, fine. I'm 18 years old. I'm looking to meet some good-looking chicks, and that seems like the place to go. All right, Arizona State, here we come. Oh, you have more than 1.2 GPA? Come right in. Okay, so there I went.
When you talk about going from polar opposites on the thermostat too.
Right.
I mean,
right.
frigid Ohio to Arizona. I mean, geesh.
And by the way, I mean, there's one thing being out of the U.S. I do appreciate Ohio, and I appreciate the values of Ohio that are not maybe present as much in every place. And I think that I still kind of have that Ohio thing in me, even though I don't consider myself an American anymore. But I went to Arizona State for a year, and basically I was staying up all night, kind of like last night before this show. I was up every night till 4 or 5 in the morning, watching stuff about various businesses, watching news, watching financial news. I remember, on the West Coast, you'd wake up to the financial shows at 3 in the morning part of the year because it was on Pacific time, and they start at 6 a.m. in New York, and I was watching that kind of stuff. And I would go to bed at 5 in the morning, and surprise, surprise, I'd miss a lot of those 8:30 classes. So I kind of, I don't know if they said we don't want you, or if you can come back, but we're keeping our eye on you. And so I kind of pretty quickly slunk out and just had to make a go of it in the business world.
Yeah. So quick angle side, I grew up in Northern California. I had 3 buddies from my high school class that went to Arizona. They all lasted a semester also. So I think they're on the same schedule you were on at Arizona.
Arizona would be a step up, though. I mean, that's where the smart people went to, was the University of Arizona. Arizona State was like, you got some problems.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's where David Spade went. So you guys you and David Spade are right there next to each other. So.
That's right.
We saw David Spade a while back in the broadcasting industry. Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
So you don't finish college, but you said you want to be in business that whole time, right? So I mean, that was just kind of you're like, I just I want to. Why learn about making money when I can go out and just try and make it myself, right? That's kind of the entrepreneurial drive anyways, right? Like, and
did you run into any of that where people are like, why are you going into business? You didn't even stick through college. Like what are you doing? Because I think most people kind of think like the natural thing is, you go to school, you go to high school, college, business. Is there any pushback on like, you can't just shift gear, you can't skip a gear?
Well, I mean, I was not exactly the prom king, nor did I want to be, and that just wasn't my mode. So, the one thing in high school that really got me out of my shell was I got a job at an Italian restaurant, and I was the host, and I had to talk to all these cute girls from the schools around.
Poor you.
Forced me to get out. But otherwise, I was not a highly sociable person back then, and I think that, to your point, I kind of intuitively felt, but couldn't voice it because just, you're 18 years old, 19 years old, that, what am I learning here that's really applying to actual? So, just the other day, I'm almost 36, and I thought of something. I said, we're looking at maybe acquiring a few smaller, companies on our supply chain. I'm thinking, maybe going to some finance classes would have helped a little bit. But it was one of the first times ever that I'm like, what does this really mean? What do I need this for? And so I don't know that I was surrounded by anybody who was telling me not to do it. I think I was basically just doing my own thing in a way that an 18 or 19-year-old would, which is kind of stumbling through it, thinking that but you don't really know.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, but I was kind of talking about something that's kind of in your wheelhouse a little bit bigger, but how do you see education? You live on a global scale now, and you see the kind of how education, and you hire people from different countries in the world. And especially now with COVID and everybody, getting educated online and Zoom classes that everybody's tired of. But how do you see the education shift, pre-COVID, even, post-COVID now changing, right? I mean, is that education, that degree, is it as important as it ever was, or is it becoming less important? Kind of how do you see that shifting on that global scale?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because one thing I do think is the nomad world, you can look at it from the people that I work with who are very wealthy people who want to go live in Dubai or want to split their time between Dubai and, Mexico City or whatever the case may be, Kuala Lumpur, where I am now. And then you also have the digital nomad crowd, which is these younger kids who oftentimes they're backpacking or they're just, going and working, on laptops at cafes around the world. And I think that it's possible to get into a bubble where I think that's the future of the world. I'll tell you what I see around the world. It's a lot of people who have not adapted to this. And we've gone into certain markets with the attempt of hiring. Sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't, where the idea of what we do is fascinating. It's the first time they ever heard about it. And yet, you can talk to certain people who do what I do and it's just, routine. And so, my thought is, for the time being, the majority of people still want to have jobs. You've seen cultures of forced entrepreneurship in places like India, where there just aren't enough jobs and people have to be entrepreneurs. I think there's perhaps a culture of that in Turkey or Armenia. There's a certain forced entrepreneurship because maybe you were from a minority culture where nobody would hire you. You're the Chinese in many places in Southeast Asia, for example, or the Albanians in places in the Balkans. And so there are cultures that have that. But I think a lot of people in a lot of countries, they're still looking at the corporate job. And I think there's a lot of places where, Serbia, for example, we have a big presence there. A lot of parents are still telling their kids, make sure you go and get a safe job that has a pension, go to university, get some silly degree. And, I think it's going to take a while before people told me what my father told me to do, which is do your own thing. I think a lot of other countries, especially if you're an American, there is a greater sense of conformity in some of them. Not all of them, but some of them.
Sure.
So I don't know that I think you can say incremental change. I don't really look at education. Although I will say this, there are some countries where, as much as I say college degree doesn't matter, there are some countries where the only people not going to college because of this conditioning is people who really have no ambition. And it's almost kind of a litmus test for ambition because that is the culture.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that, and that's a very wise statement. That totally makes sense. You can't get ahead if you don't have an education. It's kind of like cart before the horse type thing. You have to go get the education so you can actually go create the business. It opens the more doors to get in. Whereas in America, you're kind of seeing this different shift in the education part of like, hey, do I need to go to Harvard anymore? Is that really that big of a benefit? We're doing online classes for the next 3 years, and I'm paying $50,000 a year. I mean, is that really a benefit to me as a person?
I don't know. It's very interesting because I look at so many things in life as name brands. I paid extra for a wallet. It's a Prada wallet. People say, oh, it's a waste of money. But who would pay that much money for a wallet with a little logo on it? I like nice wallets. But, to me, Harvard or the United States as a country, those are name brands.
Sure.
And are they going to be worth it anymore? I happen to think on a country level, name brands are becoming increasingly overpriced and uninteresting. I'm not as deep into the educational system to know that perhaps there are connections you can get from going to Harvard.
Sure.
But I do think it'll be less relevant in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And as the face of that kind of changes, like surprisingly, the internet and technology is changing lots of industries, right? Like right before our very eyes, ones that you would never thought of would have changed, which is kind of cool.
I think whatever change we do that does happen is going to happen pretty quick, though, because I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it was probably around 25% of people for the current fall semester re-registered to a school that was cheaper and closer to home. So I think people are starting to weigh that maybe I don't need to maybe I don't need to go all the way down to San Diego, or I don't need to go to New York City. I could stay local, close to mom and dad, and save a few bucks and not be broke.
Here's the other thing, by the way, that Americans are doing in particular. I know this is so true all around the world, but they're also going into large amounts of debt in some cases with these expensive schools. I mean, there are kids who will go to fancy private schools and they will take out $200,000 in loans. I just had a gentleman yesterday. We've got a lot more doctors that have been reaching out to us lately as they're concerned about what's happening in the U.S. and in the West. They're not planning to move overseas or save on taxes, but they want to have a plan B. And I talked to a doctor who got $600,000 in student loans. Now, he's doing pretty well, but how many people go to Harvard and get an art degree with $300,000 in debt? You're an indentured servant.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very well said. I totally agree. Yeah. Well, shift gears one more. So let's go back to your first business, right? We watched some of your stuff. You said your first business was a broadcasting business. Kind of what was that about, and kind of how did that come about?
It was. I won't say there was some grand vision right away. I think that, like any organic entrepreneur, it was shifted over time. My interest at 19 years old was I got a radio show on a local radio station. I'm still friends with one of the guys whose family owned it at the time. And they put me on Sunday from 11 to midnight, and I had to bring in a sponsor. I had to go out and find a sponsor to bring in $60 to pay for the board up to go and produce the show. And after about 4 months of doing that, I eventually later got a little bit bigger sponsor and did a Saturday and Sunday or Saturday afternoon show. And I guess I was all right compared to the people on this station. But I quickly learned that there's a lot more money in helping people do their shows on these small AM radio stations. And so eventually we built a business where we went out and we mass marketed the idea of by the way, partially how my father built his business in an earlier era, which was he was a radio guy. That was his side hustle. And he got paid to come in on Saturdays. And I would go with him when I was 3, 4, 5 years old. And he would do a money show. And then people would say, well, this guy sounds interesting. Let me call him and have him manage my money. And you got hundreds of clients that way and built a huge business. And so having known that and having a little bit of broadcast experience and knowledge, I basically started going out and contacting these little flea-want AM radio stations that were on the brink of insolvency that couldn't compete in an increasingly consolidated industry. And I said, listen, I will be the marketing guy to bring in financial advisors, doctors, dentists, whatever, to host, Tooth Talk or the Financial Hour. And they will pay you. And I will take a cut and we will, prop up your station. And for the number of years, we helped stations, including those who didn't love the programming, but they literally said, you helped us stay on the air because we would bring in the Gold Show or the colon cleanse show or the overnight televangelist show or whatever, and these guys would pay, and we would prop up these failing radio stations all across the country. I later turned it into more of an institutional business, working with people from one of the biggest insurance companies in the Fortune 100. We had big direct marketing companies with big budgets, and we were helping them do 100 station buys, basically building out a radio network. So it was the unsexy side of broadcasting.
But hey, I mean, if unsexy stuff is still cutting checks, though, you're like, hey, I can do that, right? I mean, that's. I remember
it as it really started to take off. I was in China for the first time, and I met some people, and I realized for the first time in life that these guys were making money doing things like garbage removal. Totally unsexy stuff, and yet they had huge net worths and they were making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And you would never know it to look at them, but they were doing unsexy stuff. And then at the same time, I would go up to Vegas every once in a while, more than every once in a while, perhaps. And you look at these guys who were running, these nightclubs, and they were doing all this sexy stuff, and they were dripping, and you say, oh, this guy's bankrupt. This guy, Paris Hilton's boyfriend, he's over, or whatever. And I'd say to myself, yeah, that guy in China, hauling your trash, that's the way to go. And I think it was a very guiding principle to be in unsexy businesses.
Yeah. So one of our previous guests, he had the saying that if you sell to the classes, you'll live with the masses. Yeah. If you sell to the masses, you'll live with the classes. And that's really resonated. That totally makes sense. I mean, you have to, either go huge or go very niche. That's the only two ways you can do it. And, like you said, the guys that were, all for show run the nightclubs in Vegas, and that's like a loser's game, right? Because you're hot for one week, and then next week you're not the cool place to go anymore, and you're out of business.
But I think if you have a passion for something, I mean, for me with Nomad Capitalist, it was developed entirely organically. It was me blogging after running a number of businesses in the United States. And even back when I was doing the radio thing, I realized the potential of I'm basically talking to people on the phone. I'm getting payments through credit card or through fax. People are sending me checks. I mean, that can be done. That can be handled remotely. I could maybe hire someone to check the mailbox, but I could be anywhere. I didn't go everywhere for a number of years, but I did start traveling more and more and more extensively. And I started eventually blogging about it, which was the beginning of Nomad Capitalist, never really knowing where it would go. And I don't know if the average person finds the idea of being a dual citizen interesting, or going offshore and saving on taxes. I mean, it's a little nerdy potentially, but I find it interesting. And so,
we love it, by the way, just for the record, we love this stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you have to really be into it. I think, even in the garbage collection business, there are very interesting things that, you can do in an unsexy business if you love business, rather than I just want to be the guy surrounded by beautiful women running a nightclub. I don't think that's sustainable.
Right. Well, that kind of leads to my next question. So when was that big, every entrepreneur says they kind of have that aha moment, not everyone, but, we're like, hey, this Nomad Capitalist thing, or, this blog I'm running, this can actually be a business. When did that kind of go boo? And you're like, oh, I'm going to do this now.
Well, I had already had the aha moment I'm tired of paying 40% in taxes. Right. And I committed to leave the U.S. for good when I started the blog. And, I tried different things. The first thing I hosted a conference about a year after starting the blog. And we had Peter Schiff, and we had a lot of people in the industry. And I was doing what I often did, perhaps out of a little bit of lower self-esteem, which was let me invite everybody who are my future potential competitors or people that are around me and learn from them. When in reality, I think that's probably not the best idea in retrospect. But it was nice to meet Peter Schiff and others. And I did that because wasn't really a money making thing. It was just like, I want to have a forum to gather people that I'd like to talk to myself and get paid in the process. Thereafter, we tried offering some different kind of products, books, what have you. People said they wanted that. But I think eventually what happened was we just got a large enough blog, eventually started doing YouTube, people started reaching out. And, at first I would talk to a few people for free. And I can specifically remember some of the places where I was doing these calls because I took it so, as an Ohio guy, I took it so seriously. Like, I've got a call with someone who's not paying me at all. I better make sure that I'm on time. Let me make sure I'm running on like a madman. Let me find the right place to sit down. And people wouldn't show up, or they'd call and be like, I think you should do this. And they'd be like, yeah, whatever. And I realized, very quickly, perhaps not for the first time, but I was reminded, nobody values that. And so I kind of figured out from there, what do I need to do if people keep reaching out to actually, help them? And it's evolved over the years. And I think it's constantly evolving like any business.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, you can't start writing the blog and then, it works into a business. But when you're like, okay, this is how I have to market this thing. This is like, these are the people I have to go after. These are the people, how did that kind of evolve? Or was it kind of a natural progression, for the clientele you're going after?
Well, I think it just happened where there's more and more and more people. And when you have more volume, you can be more selective. And I also think that the mindset changed as I became more comfortable. I think I've had a good handle of this. For 13 years, I've been going all around the world and meeting people and building my knowledge. I don't know that I've ever given myself enough credit, again, the Ohio piece, for what it is that I know. Even to this day, I continue to think, oh, maybe everyone doesn't have that talent. And I should maybe explain that more to the new person because they don't have the same natural ability for that I do. And obviously I don't have the same natural abilities that they do.
Yeah.
And so, I think just, doing more of this stuff has helped me. I've gotten multiple citizenships. I've talked about getting some of them. I've talked about my experiences. And so the more that I go out and do this, the more I talk about it, the more you attract people. And I think that a great phrase for anyone in business is, winners can tell other winners.
Right.
And so obviously anyone who's out there on the internet today sharing a message has people who don't like them, has people who are trying to rip them down. I think it's always been the case, but social media highlights it. But I think that, if you're doing something, if you are actively providing a service and you're actively living what you offer, people who are successful see that. And so I think that the more we embody that, the more that the people at the lower end of the spectrum are just inherently repelled. And the people at the higher end of the spectrum, we've had people who are 9 and 10 figure net worths. We've had people who are celebrities. We obviously don't talk about these people because, we work in an area that people don't always want to be talked about. But I think they've just inherently found us and resonated with our message and, resonated with the entrepreneurial nature of it. Obviously, a guy with a 10 figure net worth could hire the big four. And I think that most of them had, and they wanted a different perspective, a more entrepreneurial perspective. And so I think it's just being yourself and being organic and having, self-confidence and living and being the embodiment of what it is that you sell.
Yeah. No,
so at this point, you're traveling the globe, you're helping people get multiple, citizenship in different countries. What were maybe some some misconceptions you had at first about, traveling the globe or living in certain parts of the country that you think maybe a lot of Americans or just people in general have about, because believe it or not, I know some people who don't want to, they don't want to get out of the city we're in, let alone the state, let alone the country, right? There's some people that just don't think on that level because to them it's scary. So, what has your experience been as far as like, hey, you know what? I thought it was going to be this way. Totally wrong.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I had a client and friend a number of years ago who was telling me about Australians. And he said, we come from whatever the city was in Australia. And he said, we're literally taught that if you invest in a different city in Australia, you're probably going to get scammed and robbed, and it's just going to all go downhill. A different city, literally, a couple hours away. Obviously, there's a lot of misconceptions that I've learned and that I now talk about in the offshore world and how offshore companies work and offshore bank accounts work. It's not about hiding money. There's a lot of disclosure that's required these days. It is about going where you're treated best, asset protection, reducing your taxes, diversifying your assets, things like that. But on just a lifestyle level, the big thing is there is not a great delta in many places between what people call the first world and what people call the third world. I'm here in Malaysia, for example. We've been, this year, obviously travel has been slowed down. And so Malaysia, one of the safest countries in the world right now, I think they did a great job without being overbearing. It's not their culture to be overbearing. And so we've had the chance to travel around now. And you drive on these roads 4 hours outside of the capital city in the middle of nowhere. These are like some of the best roads you've ever seen. I've had people who are in Eastern Europe. They're in Ukraine. They're in Serbia, for example. And they say these are better roads than you find in Detroit. They're better roads for sure than you find in Cleveland, in many parts of the United States, and many parts of the Western world. And so obviously that, every culture is different. And so I think that's helped me actually become much more self-aware in life, because the friction of you versus their culture exposes the things that you really believe, and helps you learn new things. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different perspective. I do think that on a positive side for the United States, people in the United States say, oh, Americans are lazy. And certainly there are some. A lot of other cultures are probably much lazier. So the idea that everything in your country is terrible is wrong. There's times where I think it'd be nice to order stuff off Amazon and have it delivered 45 minutes later. On the other hand,
that is pretty convenient, by the way.
It is. Yeah, I imagine. I missed out on
actually, this mic, I think, was the next day. I ordered it one day. It was, I think, noon the next day. I was like, awesome.
Well, that is the Nomad tax. If I want to get a mic, and we've got a lot of things here, and I've started to found a lot of things, and now you've got online. You've got e-commerce in a lot of countries now, but it's not quite as easy. I call it the Nomad tax, which is why. For me, the tax savings and the lifestyle improvements are what makes it. But no, I just think that people are much nicer. I think that there's a lot more development that you wouldn't expect. I think those are two things that stood out to me.
Yeah. I think dropping your taxes from that 43 down to, whatever you're at now probably overcompensates for the expedited shipping. So you probably got the better end of the deal anyway.
Yeah, at a certain point, like I got a credit card sent. I have a mailbox in the U.S. and I got some stuff sent, and it's just like, it feels weird. It's like, what? Just spend $75 and have it sent, DHL 2-day or whatever. And it seems ridiculous for something, but that is the Nomad tax, right? I mean, if you make $1 million or $2 million or $5 million a year, and you can go from whatever you're paying in California now, which is is insane. It's
yes. That's a pretty that is a spot on description there. Yeah.
They're going to pass the wealth tax in California. That's coming.
Oh, they'll pass anything. I mean, it's been that way. I mean, the franchise tax board in California is the most aggressive tax collection agency on the face of planet Earth, bar none. The IRS is the kiddie table in comparison, and they're not exactly a joke. But I mean, I don't. Obviously, my perspective is not what's it like to move overseas for $50,000 a year. Obviously, you can lower your cost of living. I think you can increase your freedom. You can be a lot happier. You can meet potentially nicer people, better dates, whatever the case may be. But, from a financial perspective, I think that if you're willing to, pay a little bit of nomad tax, as I call it, pay $75 to have your Amex card shipped because they're not shipping it to where you live potentially, then, it's well worth it. But there are trade-offs. I think that the idea there's anything that's perfect is of course wrong.
Yeah, there's no utopia out there, right? No perfect.
Not yet. I mean, California is establishing their utopia. They got the inheritance tax and the wealth tax, and then we've got utopia. I'm telling you.
I mean, has anybody told these people there are other beaches in the world?
That's funny. My brother just saw his in-laws in Florida. They just moved to Florida, and he was just like, for as much as people rack on Florida, I had a really nice time. He was like, I just, it wasn't bad. It wasn't expensive, and the beaches were nice, and the water was warm, and the food is great. I was like, yeah.
I mean, I own an apartment in Montenegro in kind of Southeast Europe, across from Italy in the Adriatic. There's a beautiful yacht club, the only platinum certified yacht club down the street from my house. And, my thing is, I don't expect that property to have substantial capital appreciation compared to the other properties I own around the world, because you know what? One of my employees who is ethnic Albanian, kind of the opposite culture of Serbia and Montenegro, she went to Albania, in the south of Albania, and they've got beautiful, she's sending me the pictures, beautiful beaches. They haven't developed yet. You can pay $500 for a meter of property almost right across the street from the sea. And so I'm saying to myself, the minute they develop this, my property in Montenegro, I mean, it's going to have some competition. They're inventing beach resorts all over the world. Every year there's a new beach resort.
Yeah. So, quick anecdotal side note. So, from right from your city, you're in Kuala Lumpur, right, Andrew? That's where you're at right now.
Yeah.
So, one of the best evenings and the best cigar I ever had was if you take a line exactly east from Kuala Lumpur. That we were staying at the Hyatt Regency on the South Tennessee, and we sat out there one night, and I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. It was a beautiful beach in Malaysia, and I was like, man, this is I could live here. I always see why people move here, and that was in 2005. So, and it's Malaysia's got nothing but better since then.
I think it's one of the hidden gems, and I always tell the story. I mean, you go back and look at the movie Entrapment from Entrapment. Yeah, Entrapment from the late '90s with Sean Connery, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and they're scaling the Petronas Towers near my house here, and you look around, it's what they call a kampong. There's still one little area near us called Kampong Baru. They have refused to sell, and they have this old school 100-plus-year-old village. That was the whole city basically.
Yeah.
I was 13 years old. This is when my dad was telling me to go where you're treated best. And now I'm 300 meters, I'm 400 meters away. You can't see the darn things because there's so many big buildings that they developed as this becomes really wealthier than many European countries if you look at the numbers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very cool place.
And nobody knows about that.
So, kind of moving back to, governments, are they trying to make it easier or harder to become that nomad, right? Is it something that they're embracing, or is it country dependent, or is some countries cracking down?
Well, again, I think everyone likes people, businesses, countries who understand where their bread is buttered and they want to welcome you rather than repel you. So, Barbados recently has talked about this 1-year visa for people who want to work online and letting people come and do that and removing any gray area that was remaining of the fact that you can come and work. Estonia has made certain things. I don't know that they're really had the intended purpose, but they've had a good attitude. Georgia, a country I talk a lot about, has kind of pulled back a little bit, but had they still have a 360-day tourist visa policy for most countries. You can come there. So those countries are welcoming. Malaysia is open to pretty much everybody on earth. They're welcoming. You have Western countries that I guess are, Adam Carolla, the comedian, talks about California as kind of being the prom king or the prom queen that we mentioned earlier once they turn 50. And it's like your day in the sun is kind of over, but you're still clinging to the fact like that's still your thing is that you were the prom king.
You threw the touchdown. You threw the game-winning touchdown.
Right. In 1997, you beat the Thunderbirds at high school. A rousing victory. And you're clinging to that. And I don't want to be dismissive of anybody, obviously. I mean, but my big thing, just again going back to my background, is, are you entitled? And I don't want to deal with entitled people in my life, and I don't want to deal with entitled countries. Obviously, we don't all have to achieve amazing things, and I think that we should have a lot of respect for people who choose to live simple lives. And that's one thing I've learned traveling around the world. Some people just want to live simple lives, and maybe that's better than what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And we should respect that. But I also think that if you're a country, you have a lot of Western countries that are just, like we're in control, and you're going to do what we want. And it's like, you really think, Gavin Newsom, nobody can leave California? And by the way, that's why they have to say we're going to go back 10 years.
Yeah,
if you leave, we're going to go back and find you.
Yeah, right.
People that we've been talking about this. I gave up 3 years ago almost my U.S. citizenship, and people say, "Oh, it's a tax." I paid very little tax overseas, right? But I did it legally. Sounded a little Trumpian there. I paid very little. And
that's good. That was a good one. That's a good impression. Yeah.
But they're going to do, and I said to myself, they're going to go, if you stay a U.S. citizen with all the new stuff they're going to roll out, they're going to go back retroactively. And they're going to start. I mean, by the way, they did 3 years ago with people who were overseas and people had to pay some tax retroactively. I said, you're going to see more of this. And now here it is, more of it. They're going to do anything by hook or by crook. And I say to myself, they're living off of the brand name of California. They're living off the brand name of the United States. And here's what it is. They're not even living off of, they're living off of misinformation. It's like a food product that you see the nice shiny ads and everyone eats the food product, but actually it's filled with GMOs and MSG and all kinds of terrible stuff and nobody knows about it. when you go and you talk to people in China, for example, and you say, hey, if you get a green card, you're going to have to pay tax on your worldwide income. That big business in China, it's all on the table for the IRS. No, that can't be possible. No, I understand they tax in the U.S. No, they will tax your business in China if you live there or become a citizen. And nobody believes it. And so these countries are living off of the marketing that they can't. No, it can't be that bad. Yes, it is. And so I think that the countries that have the brand name, they are using it. Western countries, I think, are much more judgmental about it. Countries like Singapore, where they don't really care, they're just raising their prices. Oh, you want to immigrate here? Now it's 5 million. Why not? From Afghanistan, you have 5 million. All right, you look clean. Okay, let's go. But the Western countries have become very judgy about it, and it really just is. Oh, you don't like it? To me, oh, you're a traitor. Great, get the hell out. I think honest feedback is always valuable. Stupid feedback is not valuable, but honest feedback of here's what's not working for me. No, they're just gonna buy votes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just as
I don't really think I get carried away though.
No. We've been talking about this for a while, but California is gonna add on the death tax. The inheritance tax is coming in California, and it's gonna be $3.5 million. $3.5 million. Everything over that is taxable
at 40%. When they did the initial rollout, we did do what most people did don't do and actually read what it said, and it wasn't even like, hey, we're going to fund this project. It was to develop another government group to then monitor another level of inequality, right? So I was like, you're literally going to, they called it it was inheritance inequality. They're like, we're going to solve the inheritance inequality by taxing it at, the inheritance at 40%. And putting in a group to see where inheritance should go. And then from the fund, we'll try and channel money there. And I was like, sounds like a whole lot of jobs with pensions.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And that too. Listen, human beings are human beings. And certainly there's jealousy everywhere in the world. But I think that some of the cultures that I enjoy spending time in, there perhaps is less of this jealousy. Where, you look at the federal income tax that came in a little over 100 years ago, 3%. And everyone said, okay, we can all handle 3%. And now look at where it is today. I think that any of these things are the camel's nose under the tent. And so, it's just for guys for 30 million. Really, how long do you think that's going to last?
Yeah,
really?
Right.
Because those guys are going to call me. And,
right. Absolutely. Right. They leave. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, listen, I don't know how California still has 42 million people living in it. I lived in California for 7 months. One of my first big radio gigs, but I met so many people. I remember moving and I was I was young, so I'm trying to extract every dollar kind of stupidly. And I was selling my refrigerator. And I remember I'm still Facebook friends with this woman who bought my refrigerator in 2007. And they're still trying to move out of California and they just can't get ahead. But I don't know, if you're a wealthy person in California, my goodness, what's your excuse?
Yeah. Absolutely. They're leaving in droves.
They are. And when you look at the data of who's moving in and who's moving out, it's going to accelerate. Because there is a bunch of people. That's why it seems like America, or not America, but California is kind of staying, like even. But really, there's a ton of people coming in, and they're all the people who are not going to be contributing to this, right? They're the ones that are going to be more extractors, and all the people with the money are moving out. So I think the problem is going to get accelerated here pretty quick.
Yeah, I think we can talk about this for another 45 minutes. But hey, Mark, let's go ahead and kind of wrap up this episode. Kind of here, we got a couple of last questions for Andrew.
Yeah, I'm bummed. Yeah. I was going to say if you're ever in California, I'd love to get a beer or something, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
They have a in California.
We'll come to Malaysia and get a beer there.
Yeah, do that. It's a lot easier.
We'll do something better. We'll meet in Singapore and we'll go. We'll go to the oh my gosh, this famous bar in Singapore and get a Singapore sling at the Long Bar at Raffles Hotel. There we go. That'd be more fun.
Quick, we'll do a couple last questions here, or just the last question here, which was for anyone, obviously you speak to a lot of wealthy people on how to be more tax savvy and smart and everything, but they're the people who've already made it. If you were to speak to teens or early 20s, or at least the parents who have teens and early 20s, aside from the go where you're treated best, because obviously that's your go-to. I mean, what part, what worldly wisdom or not worldly wisdom, but just entrepreneurial wisdom do you have for those listeners?
Well, I think it is go where you're treated best. I think if you apply that to everything in your life, it's not a financial saying. Ask yourself, if you're in a relationship, if you're dating in a certain culture, is this where I'm treated best? Ask yourself, if you're in university, is this where I'm treated best? And so my advice would be to, if I'm a teenager, I've often said, the idea that you're going to pay Harvard, $62,000 a year, whatever it is, you could live for a fraction of that and send your kids on a whirlwind tour, perhaps not at this given moment, but on a whirlwind tour. I spent a lot of time in Cambodia. I found Cambodia one of the most fascinating markets in Asia. It's probably one of the few very investable markets left in Asia that's available to foreigners, and has a lot of potential still. And you just will trip over business ideas there. There were a couple guys in Cambodia a while back. They started a coffee shop called Brown Coffee. And now Starbucks has to come and kneel to them, and Costa Coffee has to come and kneel to them. And you have the best Starbucks, one of the best Starbucks, in my opinion, in the world, in BKK1 in Phnom Penh, because you had these guys who had the simple idea of, let's start a coffee shop. There was another guy who started, I think it's called Blue Pumpkin, little ice cream shop, little ice cream stand, that I believe started near the Angkor Wat temple complex. It's expanded all over the country. The guy has a multi-million-dollar ice cream business. You can't do that right now in the U.S. You're not going to compete with Dairy Queen. I mean, maybe there's some niche you can get into, but I mean, everybody's doing the same things. And so I would send my kids on a whirlwind tour of looking at all the different places. And I would probably go, if I'm a young person, I would not be doing what I'm doing, which is being in Malaysia, for example, which in my opinion is the middle. Singapore to me is needlessly expensive. I'll bank there, I'll store wealth there, but I don't need it. It's not quite enough freedom. It's needlessly expensive. I don't want to spend $3 million on an apartment in one place. But anyway, I wouldn't even go to Malaysia. I would go to the Cambodias. I would go to places in Africa. I would go to the Bolivias. I would go to places that are on nobody's radar, and I would find the opportunities. And you can do that for a fraction of whatever you're paying at university. I can promise you, you're going to learn a lot more about how the world works, and you're going to see the real world in action in a way that you'll never see in university. And that's what I would probably recommend.
I hear property in Wuhan, China is pretty cheap right now too. So you can always go there.
There's always opportunity somewhere.
Awesome. Well, hey, again, Andrew Henderson, Nomad Capitalist. I mean, really, we hope. Josh, do you have any? Well, we'll go around to Josh and I real quick and do some last thoughts. But if you want to find Nomad Capitalist, you can find it. Andrew, where should people? Obviously, there's Nomad. There you go. You got the book. There you go. There we go. Hold your book up close to the camera.
Hold up there one more time.
There we go. Yeah.
So this is the book I actually wrote this book, and this is one of my. Before I wanted to be in business, I wanted to be an author, and so I took about 2 years and wrote this book. This is not going to tell you the exact plan for every unique person to go offshore and save on taxes, whatever else. But it's going to lay out the philosophy. It's going to dispel some common myths. It's basically 1,000 YouTube videos or 1,800 blog posts in 260 pages. And a lot of people who successfully work with us started with the book. So this is a great place to distill everything into one place. We have a website, nomadcapitalist.com. We've got about 1,000 videos on YouTube. We've got podcasts. We've got it all. And then, of course, from here, if you wanted to work with us, we have a boutique firm that does that.
Perfect. Awesome.
Awesome. Josh, any last thoughts?
Yeah, just for our listeners, I mean, we kind of love this stuff. And like we've always talked about, if you want to do things differently, you have to think, you got to get outside the box. You got to listen to people that have done things differently. If you want to save in taxes, you got to, use the entire 200,000 pages of tax code, not the 200 the IRS wants you to use. And, and take that thought and put it in lots of different places.
And you're going to be laughed at and you're going to be hated.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And that is so correct. But if you want to do things different, you have to be different and do stuff different. And to get ahead, you got to do the different stuff. So I was just really excited, Andrew. Thank you so much for being on this episode. And that was a really good discussion about your entrepreneurial journey and what you have going on.
Yeah. Real quick, nothing we say can or should be taken as tax, legal, or financial advice. Obviously, if you heard something here that is super, a lot of interesting stuff here, go seek counsel. Go to Nomad Capitalist. Go speak to an asset protection attorney. Don't just take this podcast as gospel by any means. Thanks again. We got another good episode with Mr. Henderson here coming up. More about what he actually does with his clients and how he helps them become nomad capitalists. So come back and check out the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.